for Casey.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And firstly, I want to commend the member for Clark for bringing Claire's voice to Canberra and echo his sentiment and let Claire know that we are listening and we have heard that, so thank you. We have an important role to speak as members of parliament, but the most powerful role we can play, particularly in this conversation, is to bring the voice of participants and those involved. So thank you, member for Clark, and please let Claire know people have listened. And this is an important conversation that we are having. We need to get this right. And last month, the Minister for Health dropped a bombshell on every single person who relies on the NDIS during a speech at the Press Club. He announced that every person with a disability who receives support through the NDIS would face being reassessed to get vital and often life-saving supports. And since that announcement and that bombshell, my office, and I know every office across our community, has been inundated with calls and emails from distressed locals and their support workers uncertain of what the future holds. In my electorate of Casey, there are 5,459 individuals who rely on the NDIS, and that's just the individual participants. Beyond that number is their families, their communities, their loved ones, their support networks. These changes will impact tens of thousands of my community and millions of Australians all across the country, which is why it's so important that we get it right. And as I stand here today and speak on this bill, I want those Australians to know that I hear their concerns loud and clear. For Australians navigating significant and permanent disability, the NDIS is much more than a safety net. It is the bridge between isolation and community. It brings independence, the ability to work, and the supports to thrive and live a life of dignity rather than limitation. And for the families and loved ones, it gives them a support network and it gives them hope and certainty for the future. For so many families, the NDIS is a lifeline. It provides people with disabilities and their families with hope, structure, support and guidance. In some cases, the support of the NDIS is what holds families together. And at the moment, too many of these families feel like that hope is slipping away. They've seen their supports reduced and their funding cut. Now, what is just a line item in the budget in Canberra is the difference between hope and despair for the families impacted. And we need to remember that behind every number, every budget saving the government talks about, we are talking about people. And people like Jackson in my electorate of Casey. For Jackson, the NDIS has changed his life and changed his family's life. It's provided him with the supports that allow him to work, to get back into our community, give his parents the support they need, give his parents the break that they need. And I had the opportunity to meet with Jackson's parents and hear firsthand from them about Jackson's story. And when I first met with them, and I've engaged with them quite a lot, they brought a photo of Jackson to make sure that I knew there was a person behind the conversation, because Jackson wasn't able to attend. And then they invited me, and I had the honour of attending Jackson's work, to see him working with his carer, and to meet Jackson and talk to him, talk about the football that he plays at the Montrose Football Club in the All Abilities team, and really see firsthand the life that Jackson is building and how important it is to him and his family. And that is because of the NDIS. And so we need to make sure that people like Jackson can get the support that they need, and part of that is clearly making sure that the NDIS is sustainable. And it's clear the status quo isn't working. Fraud and rorting have infiltrated the scheme, and it's broken. The NDIS was intended to be a participant-friendly system, yet I continue to hear from families within our community that they are struggling to navigate the system and living in fear of funding cuts and what it means to their loved ones. And I want to share a story of a family in the Upper Yarra who reached out to my office this week. This is a single-parent family already experiencing severe financial and social hardship, currently living without permanent, secure housing. This family relies on the NDIS support for their son and recently applied for a review, given the son's escalating aggressive behaviours and difficulty attending a mainstream school. Not only were they unsuccessful in getting further support, the NDIS reduced the supports the family already had, severely reducing the son's plan at the time that they need it most. This includes the removal of support coordination, reductions in behaviour support, including spreading funding that was initially intended for a 12-month period to last over a 3-year period, as well as almost halving the therapy supports available. Despite clear risks, these critical supports have been cut at a time of worsening behaviours and financial distress for the family. There are a lot of people right now who are exceptionally worried about whether they themselves, their child, family member or loved ones will still be eligible for support through the NDIS. The answer isn't clear, and where do they go? Well, our state health systems are already at capacity and people are being turned away from daily services. We have a situation where NDIS participants are too scared to ask for a plan to be reviewed for the fear that it will be cut like the family that I just spoke about. And this from a Prime Minister that said no one left behind. Well, for those on the NDIS, at the moment they're feeling left behind and forgotten by this Prime Minister. Let's chalk that up to another example of the Prime Minister saying one thing before an election and delivering another after the election. And there is no doubt that the NDIS has rapidly grown since its establishment. Originally intended to support around 410,000 Australians, the NDIS now supports 760,000 participants, and the number continues to grow. Originally estimated to cost $13.6 billion, the NDIS now costs around $50 billion, expected to reach $70 billion by the end of the decade. Now, clearly this isn't sustainable and changes are needed. However, how the changes happen also matter. The fact is that one of the reasons this is the first piece of legislation, the first piece of legislation the government introduced after the budget is that they need to rush this through the Parliament so they can start to bank the savings in their budget that they've already spent in other areas. And this is now the Albanese government's third attempt to slow the growth of the scheme. They set a target of 8% in 2023. In January this year, that was reduced to 5 to 6%, and in April this year, it was revised down again to 2%. Right now, growth in the NDIS is sitting at 10.3%, meaning this government is failing on every metric. They've banked savings previously that they've failed to hit, and they've banked more savings into the future, and that's what makes those on the system so nervous right now. Because without a clear implementation strategy, policy guidelines and consultation with the disability community to get these significant changes right, the government's growth targets will be nothing more than an aspirational target to fix their bottom line, and there will be significant damage done to those on the system as they rush to get this number banked. Because, as I said, the government has already banked the number. They've spent the savings that they're in the NDIS in this budget. And while the NDIS has to be sustainable and spending needs to be reduced, this cannot be because the government and this Treasurer cannot manage the budget. This Prime Minister cannot punish those on the NDIS and their families because of his failures and his Treasurer's failures. And Labor's bill makes a number of changes to the scheme. The bill will restrict a person's ability to ask for an unscheduled reassessment of their plan. It will establish a framework to assess a person's eligibility for support through the NDIS. Until now, eligibility has been based primarily on a person's diagnosis. This bill will change that to be based on a person's reduced functional capacity as a result of the diagnosis. This bill establishes the legislative mechanism to change the way a person is assessed, but provides no detail on what that new assessment will look like. This hasn't been developed yet. This, in and of itself, has caused a level of fear and anxiety amongst the community. And as the Shadow Treasurer would know, this government's big on making announcements but providing no detail, whether it is the NDIS or capital gains, negative gearing. So many things about this government is a big headline with no detail and more damage done. But when it's impacting people on the NDIS, it is deceitful and it's disgraceful. My word is my bond, no Australian left behind. This Prime Minister has not delivered one shred of honesty or integrity in his time as Prime Minister. And changes of this magnitude need to be done right. People need to be consulted, and they haven't been. And there will also be changes to plan renewals, and the caution we have for the government on this is to ensure that there is no gap between a person's plan ending and the new plan being created. And there is no delay in supports for people with disability because of slow bureaucracy. And they need to make sure that the states are ready to provide the services through Thriving Kids and other mechanisms. At the moment, we're hearing stories and we're seeing the government pull funding to go into a state service that is not ready. Again, looking to bank a number in the budget at the expense of Australians that need the support. One of the most disappointing aspects of the NDIS has been the rise of fraud and rorts within the system. Week after week, we are seeing stories of criminals exploiting the scheme for personal gain, in some cases in the millions, and often for services that were never provided. In the calendar year of 2025, $48.83 billion was spent on paid supports to participants. Now, if 6 to 10% of those transactions were non-compliant, fraudulent or incorrect, that would equate to a $2.9 to $4.8 billion cost to the scheme per annum. Sounds very similar, Shadow Treasurer, to the CFMEU and the Allen Labor government. There's a connection between Labor and promising things and not delivering, and providing services that have been fraud and corruption for their friends. Pipeline for public money into organised crime. Well said, Shadow Treasurer. Because evidence from investigations and prosecutions show that these losses arise from a range of activities, including outright fraud, deliberate over-servicing, false invoicing, claims for services never delivered, and collusion between providers and participants. This bill goes some way to addressing the rising number of bad actors taking advantage of participants and taxpayers by introducing additional provider registration requirements. Right now, around 94% of providers are unregistered. The controls and fraud protection mechanism are far too weak, and we see this nearly every day in the papers and on social media. And this is absolutely unacceptable. These providers are taking advantage of NDIS participants, and they are taking advantage of the taxpayers who are funding this work. There are a few measures in this bill that stamp out this fraud. The digital payments platform needing to retain receipts and evidence of services, and the 90-day claim timeframe will help with some of this, but it will not stamp out the rorts. And that's why the Coalition has called for a Senate inquiry into this bill, and submissions are currently open to participants, families, carers, providers and advocates right across the country. We must carefully scrutinise these changes. NDIS participants can't be expected to trust reforms that this government can't even explain and they need more information on what these changes will mean for their future.
Authorised by Aaron Violi, Liberal Party, Lilydale.